Amartya Sen and the concept of human freedom, Kumar Bagchi. When are human beings free? One kind of answer was provided by various strands of Indian philosophy or advocating that men are free only when they have broken off all worldly bonds. But it was also contended that men can be free even while living in society provided they can act and think dispassionately. Very rarely was women's freedom under discussion. The dialogue between Jaggobalko and Maitreyi is very much of an exception. Even then, the question of women's civil freedom as against her spiritual liberation remained very much in limbo. These disputations left undecided the question of freedom of human beings as species rather than of particular, generally privileged men. That question was reopened during the revolutionary changes that swept Europe from the 16th to 19th century. At first, philosophers were concerned to clarify the nature of political authority and extent of freedom. Subjects who became citizens from the time of French Revolution of 1789 could enjoy under the authority. Subjects enjoyed civil freedom if they could engage freely in any trade, move from one place to place, marry freely, of course, according to the dictates of their religion and the laws of the state, and express their opinions freely against subject to legitimate instructions, restrictions placed by the political authority. The right to choose their own rulers is not included in this idea of civil freedom. The only restriction placed on the actions of political authority was that it should not act arbitrarily and that it should respect the kinds of civil freedom enumerated above. Rousseau was one of the first philosophers to put forward the idea that the people themselves should choose their government irrespective of whether they are men of property. The Republicans are proponents of political freedom with some remarkable exception, such as Winstanley in England had wanted to restrict the rights to choose rulers only to men of property. Since the American and French revolutions, democracy or universal suffrage for men as a way of choosing governments came to be accepted as an ideal among people of a radical political bent. The only restriction placed on the action of the political authority was that it should not act arbitrarily and that it should respect the kinds of civil freedom enumerated above. Rousseau was one of the first philosophers to put forward the idea that the people themselves should choose their government irrespective of whether they are men of property. The Republicans are proponents of political freedom, with some remarkable exception, such as Winstanley in England, had wanted to restrict the rights to choose their rulers only to men of property. Since the American and French Revolution, democracy or universal suffrage for men as a way of choosing their governments came to be accepted as an ideal among people of a radical political bent. As soon as this ideal was propagated, however, most political theories wanted to guard the minority of minorities against the tyranny of majority. John Stuart Mill's famous book on liberty was mainly directed towards the need for protecting individual liberty against oppression by the majority, the masses or the mob. However, even before this book was written, Karl Marx was advancing the view that the freedom consists mainly in the freedom of activity of human beings as active entities in society. Although Marx never confined his attention only to the material well-being of people, but thought of all human creatures as necessarily beings of people, beings whose activity means thinking in action, Many socialists came to the privileged material well-being over civil and political freedom. On the other side, extreme libertarians came to disregard the material condition of human beings, such as health, nutrition, education, housing, and conditions of employment, while seeking to endow them with the freedom of choice. Amartya Sen's incisive writings can be seen as a further development and reconciliation of the dichotomy posed by many liberals between the so-called positive freedom and negative freedom. The components of positive freedom are those which enable the individuals to be healthier, longer lived, better educated, and endowed better with material goods. A state of society which ensures the enjoyment